There once was a salesman from Schmeling who was desperate to be more compelling, but his numbers were numb, his quota quite glum, until he took the ABTs of selling. Hi, I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story. You're probably wondering why I started this special edition with a silly limerick. Well, first, because I think silliness is so undervalued in today's over-serious world. Secondly, I want you to be the absolute most compelling communicator on the planet by taking my new short online course called The ABTs of Selling. You can find it right now at businessofstory.thinkific.com and start putting this messaging marvel to work for you. And third, today's guest, Patty Limerick, has played the fool, taking her to marvelous heights in her career. She'll share why, perhaps, you should tap into your fool too.
I have walked into the meeting of U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service, or I have walked into the meeting room of the leadership of the Environmental Protection Agency, or I've just walked into some place where if you look at me there, you think, what on earth? I'm not in clown makeup in those situations. That would be ridiculous to go in fool's regalia and clown makeup, but I am certainly in that role of the one person who just sticks out like a sore thumb. I guess back to the notion that yes, people welcome us, but there is a moment of unease of what is this person doing here? And why is she so not one of us?
Patty Limerick is the faculty director and chair of the board of the Center of the American West at the University of Colorado. She's a best-selling author of The Legacy of Conquest, a MacArthur Fellow, and a former official fool for both Yale and Harvard Universities. Pretty amazing for a fool to go on to serve as president of several professional organizations, advised documentary and film projects, and done 2 tours as a Pulitzer nonfiction jurist, as well as chairing the 2011 Pulitzer Jury in History. Patty is known as a fun and engaging speaker on American Western history and is regularly featured on the op-ed pages of local and national newspapers, including serving as a guest columnist for the New York Times in the summer of 2005, and she is currently writing a monthly column for the Denver Post. So here now is a guest I find quite cool, whose story follows one precise rule, that if you want to look smart, the best place to start is to invoke your power of the fool. Patty, welcome to the show.
Oh, what a pleasure. Great to be here.
You know, our good friend, Dr. Randy Olson, introduced us through the ABT framework course that we've been doing now for, well over a year. We're working with scientists around the country on the ABT and storytelling and communications. And that's where you and I got briefly acquainted. And in one of your videos, I was amazed when you talked about your work as the fool. And why that is so interesting to me is you are a MacArthur Fellow, a Yale PhD, a Harvard professor. You have had all of this huge impact in communication and storytelling, especially as it relates to the reality of the American West that is in exact opposition to being a fool of what people think about. So today, we are going to explore the power of the fool in our lives to make significant changes in the world. Does that work for you?
Does it ever? It actually is the story of my life. So it's really, that cliche is true here, because I don't think I could have done, I think I would not have the other achievements that you mentioned if I hadn't had the fool's position to start from.
So give us a little bit of your backstory, and how did you find yourself starting to work in and playing this brand, aesthetic of the fool in the room?
Well, I am very much in debt, as we often are, to mentors. And I had a wonderful fellow, Bill Carpenter, who had worked with Hal Holbrook, had done all kinds of interesting things in theater. He started in New Haven as a graduate student. He started a workshop on clowns. That suited my needs because I was going nowhere in graduate school. I had total writer's block. I just was stalled. So, that's actually pretty sad, but it turns out okay. So I just thought, I have to find something to do in the summer when the students aren't here and I'm not teaching. And I found this workshop on fools that Bill Carpenter taught. And I went to that, and I it was actually a very nice match to my graduate career at Yale. It offered the chance to get over a lot of the weirdness and nervousness and anxiety that afflicts almost everybody in a place like Yale. I mean, it's close to universal. So just right close to the Yale campus, I found this workshop. I got to be very much under the influence of Bill Carpenter. And we would put on white face and various forms of clown makeup and very colorful clothes. And we would go out into the world at various events. You couldn't really have a festival without our group showing up there. And I will say, this is an intense part of it. And I would be wrong to leave this out. The great majority of the participants in this group wasn't huge, but it was a sizable group. They were psychiatric outpatients. They had really serious psychiatric troubles, and they had been in and out of mental hospitals. And there were like 3 or 4 of us who had only been in and out of university. So that was kind of different. A little bit of common ground there in terms of institutions, but not exact. So a lot of these people really had struggled in life and continued to struggle. And the Fools Project was just a form of, I guess I have to say, liberation. That instead of trying to pull it together, instead of trying to look like a very capable graduate student at Yale who was moving along through my dissertation, I was just out there as a fool. And very calming. I don't know that there is, I don't really take anti-anxiety. I've never taken an anti-anxiety drug, so I wouldn't know, but I would assume that it was as powerful and maybe more powerful.
So what was the role, or is the role, of the fool that you learned about back in Yale that you've used then throughout your career?
The fool, it's a great medieval tradition. And sadly, it went away as democracy and self-government rose and kings and queens kind of faded out. But a king or a queen, and you yourself have written about this, you wouldn't try to rule a kingdom or a queendom if you didn't have a fool who could speak openly, frankly, point out things that everyone else was complacently taking for granted that really had to be looked at. And I think the theory was very much that a fool would discharge bad luck. If you didn't have a person in that role, the bad luck piled up and it didn't go anywhere. Just kind of around there. So the fool was really crucial to the healthy operation of a society.
Because they can ask questions that others can't. They're not going to go to the guillotine for making fun of current rules that are going on. And I guess really was that balance, so that check against the authority.
Well, in this interview, you're doing such a great job. I mean, I'm happy. It was great. Everything you said there was exactly what I'm glad you said, because that's pretty much it. I was about to say, when you said guillotine, I've been about to say, being the fool, you're the one person who can speak freely without getting your head cut off. That's a huge advantage. That is a huge advantage. So, and then you said guillotine before I could say what I was going to say. So it's been quite wonderful. I can't wait to hear what I'm going to say next, because you'll say it first.
Well, you and I have that in common, because I sent you an excerpt from my book, Brand Bewitchery. I'm a huge believer in brand archetypes and what sort of personality does your brand show up as. And I think one of the top experts, if not the top expert in branding and archetypes, is Carol Pearson. And a marvelous book, if people want to examine what archetype is currently alive in their life, is her book called Awakening the Heroes Within, 12 Archetypes to Help Us Find Ourselves and Transform Our World. And in it, when I was reading through it, I could have been any one of these, but you know what? When I looked at mine, it came down to the fool, and I took her test, and I like to think the wizened fool, because I've been around for a while, but it really fits my personality. And here's a quote that she has that I shared in the book. And I think the reason why the fool works so well is you and I can show up working with leaders that bring us in for our advice, and there's no holds barred. She writes in the book, "The fool is the archetype most helpful in dealing with the absurdity of the modern world and with faceless, amorphous modern bureaucracies, places where no one takes personal responsibility. Rules are expected to be followed no matter how absurd they might be, and the tables are incredibly stacked against individual effectiveness." And then I follow up and say, and it's true, I pretty much rail against all of those things, always have. And so I feel like I've been able to use that same archetype in my work, and people are happy to have you in the room, surprisingly enough.
Right. I mean, there's a little bit of complication there, that sometimes, well, here's a saying I don't use very often in public, but I shall say it now, which is that the only person who is really uncomfortable in the company of a fool is a closet fool who fears that you are going to out them. When
Oh,
a certain kind of nervous, anxious person who's got a veneer over that, who's actually might seem very arrogant, but if they really have a very intense insecurity just beneath the surface, and a fool comes in the room and clown makeup and regalia and the whole thing, they they can be, well, we can say superficially they will be irritated and annoyed and want you gone. But really, what's going on there is they're scared. It's
mhm.
too close to home. And of course there is a world of difference between a person who is out in public festively dressed as a fool and enjoying every minute of it, and a person who is hidden in a closet.
How do
Fear is
you deal with that kind of person when you come across them?
a bit hard. Probably not ever by outing them. So their fear was unnecessary because that really would be a terrible thing to do. That, I mean, there are things you have to be. Everyone has to be responsible, and a fool has to be responsible. And sharply calling attention to someone else's folly, that's not sporting. That's just cruel. That's just mean. And I don't know that fools have enough presence of mind to be mean. It just isn't worth their time, or however they're going to invest their effort. Being mean or cruel is just silly. Wouldn't bother with that. So I think you try to get the person to calm down. You can say any number of things. You can say, I don't think you like me, but really, I'm quite a nice fool. And I know that you might think that I might be one of those creepy, mocking kinds of fools, but I am not that. I've never been that. And so you can just address that what seems to be the fear or anxiety there. You can, oh, I mean, for heaven's sake, that ace in the hole that a fool always has is you can make fun of yourself first. And that is always, that's a little bit, uh,
Deprecating humor, a way to kind of offset that.
right, and really in a merry and delightful way that is almost a invitation. Come on in. The water's fine. I'm making fun of myself. It's I can hardly breathe. I'm laughing so hard at myself. So you want some of that. You want some of that joy. Of course you do. Why would you not? So to just say it's really going to be better,
Yeah.
and you're cowering. Well, you don't need to. You don't need to.
So
It's
you
really
have used this persona your whole life.
good question. I was probably 25 or 26 when I took the Fool's workshop. I believe that growing up in a small town on the edge of the desert in Southern California, uh, being taught to read by my big sister, not because I was particularly brilliant, but my big sister pushed me to read early, so invited me to read, and so I had to skip a grade. I had to skip third grade, small school. Everybody looking at me. I mean, yeah, the answer to your question is going to be yes. I've played this all my life, but there I am. All the third graders are going into the third grade classroom in the small school. The fourth graders are going into their classroom. I've been told, not very gracefully by the school system, but I've been told that I am to skip third grade and go into fourth grade. So I walk into fourth grade. All the fourth graders, and it's a small school, everybody knows me. They say, Patty, you're supposed to be next door in the third grade. And I say, no, this is where I'm supposed to be. The third graders who have watched me walk in there are going, well, that's silly. Patty went into the fourth grade class and she's supposed to be over here with us. So I'm not saying that was a particularly enjoyable experience. And it wasn't a quick or easy transition, but it formed me. And I don't have any reason to panic when I go into a situation where I am uncomfortable after having been, what was I? I mean, I was 9 years old, and I don't have to worry if I think this is going rather poorly, or I feel quite ill at ease, or I seem to be the only one of my kind here. I just think, yeah, big deal. Huh? Big deal.
Yeah.
Don't
Well,
worry
that's
about it.
so interesting because so many studies say the mark of success for kids, future success for kids, is really demonstrated about their ability to be able to read in the third grade, and what level at the end of third grade is their reading level. And it is a good indicator of how successful they're going to be in the rest of their educational career and life after that. And you, being
Lord,
taught by your sister, totally skips third grade. They say, oh, you've already got this after the second grade. We're pushing you into the fourth grade. Interesting.
the handwriting didn't go so well because skipping third grade, my handwriting, nobody did any remedial work on that. But yeah, my sister did that for me. I was probably 2 years old. She's 7 years older. She came home from school. She's quite independent. She didn't want to be told what to do. She had as much of that as she could take. So she rang a little bell. She had a little bell, which is downstairs in the living room. And she rang the bell and she'd say, school time, Patty. And I'm 2.5 years old. And I don't want to go to school. But she got me reading. And the next door neighbor, who was actually a guard from Alcatraz, retired, he gave me Earl Stanley Gardner, Perry Mason novels to read, starting from when I was about 4.5 years old. So I'm reading Perry Mason mystery novels, not getting all the words by a long shot, which is good because some of the words I shouldn't have been learning there, but just thinking, kind of following this. So just a wonderful way to go into life thinking, I don't think I'm totally on top of this, but I'm going in.
Well, you have built an amazing and astonishing career, really, on documenting and talking about the reality of the American West. And I've been told that some people equate you or call you the Janis Joplin of the history world. How do you explain that?
Well, I just have to say that many years ago, I did say to people, who always had a good laugh at it, so it's a good thing I said it, but I said that I wanted to be to public speaking what Tina Turner was to performing. So I had gone down a different frame of reference, and as I'm sure you're thinking, as I'm sure all your listeners are thinking, it was Tina Turner who taught Mick Jagger how to dance, who was not very effective until Tina Turner gave him an example to follow. So Janis Joplin, Tina Turner, boy, is that great. It's really great. And I think I am unusual in the academic world. I'm certainly not unique, but I am just unrestrained in my happiness at being in people's company. When I'm introduced to give a speech, I am exhilarated. I have something that I learned that I would like to tell others. And almost always when I tell them the thing that I want them to hear, they tell me things in response to that adds to that, or puts it in a better context, or tells me something I didn't realize about the thing I thought I knew. So I have just continuously gotten high, naturally, organically, in the amazing thing to be on the planet and to think, here are these people, and they are putting up with me. And I walked into the fourth grader's classroom, maybe, or I have walked into the meeting of the leadership of the U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service, or I have walked into the meeting room of the leadership of the Environmental Protection Agency, or I've just walked into some place where if you look at me there, you think, what on earth? I'm not in clown makeup in those situations. That would be ridiculous to go in fool's regalia and clown makeup, but I am certainly in that role of the one person who just, well, I don't want to say sticks out like a sore thumb, but it's really not too far from that. And I guess back to the notion that, yes, people welcome us, but there is a moment of unease of what is this person doing here? And why is she so not one of us? And often, for good reason, there's distrust, because many people who know something, and bureaucracies are interesting places to see that, when they know something, it is their immediate assumption that people who don't know that are not going to like them and are going to be hostile to them and are going to use pejorative terms to them. So having one of the not us people show up at a podium to speak to us is a moment that is not joy.
You've had a long, distinguished career working in so many different bureaucracies. How do you keep from being that person that looks like everybody else? I mean, it would seem like they would eventually just say, oh, it's just Patty. Don't worry about it. She's just one of us.
That's a really good point. And I would say that does happen, that I've been the Bureau of Land Management, the largest land management agency in the country. The guy who was the acting director used to introduce me as saying, there's nobody who knows more about us who's not an employee of the Bureau of Land Management. There's nobody who matches Patty Limerick in what she knows about us. So, but that's different from saying, and now she has merged and we can't tell her apart from us.
Mm-hmm.
It's still the astonishment that somebody who knew so little could have come so far so fast. And of course, that gets back to your thinking about wise fools, that is the best case scenario, when you know enough about whatever group you're speaking to and whatever business. I'm sure it's very similar. Your circumstances, you know enough where you are probably going to be hitting the target in ways that people who know too much are not going to be hitting the target.
And yet you're not so jaded that you can't raise some of those questions that, stir a little bit of tension and nervousness in the group for nothing more than that story tension to get them to really explore a subject at hand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I could cite one person who is not known in any way as a fool. Lyndon Johnson's daughter, Lyndon, spoke at a memorial service for a wonderful, wonderful man, Stuart Udall, who was the Secretary of the Interior. And I had never seen her and had no idea that she would have any compatibility of speaking style with me. She was the first speaker. So Lyndon Johnson's daughter, Linda, goes up to the podium. And of course, her mother, Lady Bird Johnson, very famous and very demure as a person. So her first line, she goes up to the podium and she thanks us for being there. And she says, my mother, we were all thinking of Lady Bird Johnson, my mother and Stuart Udall were lovers. And we're all just frozen. We just don't know what's going on. And she says, we're lovers of nature and the outdoors. Okay, all righty, good, we're ready now. But man, to wake up a group of people who thought, well, we'll probably have some kind of pious little speech about how her father worked congenially with the Secretary of the Interior and so on. But instead, we're all just at fever pitch of alertness. So, I mean, that was, and she certainly wasn't in clown makeup, and she is anything but a capital F or small f fool. But that was one of those great moments of thinking, that's how it's done. It's not that you should come in and instantly lull everyone into comfort, because there's enough of that. I mean, there's enough dull speaker going on, so you don't have to do that. So a little bit of rattling them, but strategic and careful rattling, so that they're not. She had to come in fast with of nature and the outdoors.
Well, like Lisa Cron said in her fabulous book, Wired for Story, is in all storytelling and is true for presentations, is you have to have a ball in play as quickly as possible. And what you're talking about right there is throwing that ball in play and then delivering it, the punchline as quickly as possible, so you're not completely offending everybody.
Right.
So, Patty, what is your mission in life with all the focus that you have had on studying and talking about the American West and really, reinterpreting the American West? You had enormous success with the book, The Legacy of Conquest. How does this play into what your mission is?
Well, thank you for that opportunity. I will say I was not the quickest learner in figuring that out. I think that I feel so lucky to have had so many people who stuck by me, even when they might well have thought, where is this going? Now she's in clown makeup. Now she's not writing her dissertation. I mean, so there are many moments where people could have just said, this is a train that has left the station and gone off the tracks as soon as it left. So, okay, so now I can answer your question. And I think pretty soon, actually pretty early, maybe even before it was conscious to me, I wanted to be the person who refuses to stay in what we now call bubbles, what we now call silos. I didn't want to be that kind of person. Silos are not easy to climb out of, but I get out of them. I don't stay very long in them. And I certainly would never know how to climb out of an actual silo, so I probably should find another figure of speech here. But I don't go into corrals and categories very effectively. I mean, even if I'm trying to do it right, because everyone would be more comfortable, I don't do that very well. So I felt that I was the one who got to and history was a great card to be able to play in that, take people who seem to be at each other's throats, to be divided, very polarized, and to refuse to come to a halt when I was crossing the line from one group to the other, but just to walk through. I was influenced as a young person, as I hope more and more, well, I'm not sure if young people are anymore, but by Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. And Lewis Carroll wrote most excellent passage where Alice goes, and she knows that this is going to happen. She goes into a forest, and it is the forest where you cannot remember your own name, and you cannot remember what kind of creature you are. And when you are in that forest, there's other creatures there, but it doesn't seem particularly, but you can't, if you ask what kind of creature are you, there's no answer because nobody knows. So she runs into a fawn in the forest, and the fawn is just, great to see you, how's it going? And so she has her arm around the fawn's neck, and they're walking along, and it's a very warm and pleasant relationship. They get to the edge of the forest, they step out of the forest, and the fawn goes, oh no, it's a human child. Oh no, it's horrible. And leaps away. And she is surprised by the whole situation, and it all comes back. So I feel like I have spent a remarkable amount of time in that forest where people are behaving in a way that might actually be the opposite of what they were intending. But they are wandering around forest, and sometimes they will put an arm around each other's neck and they won't even notice that that is not what they well, it's they're doing what they had intended never to do in life. But if you can play it right, you can create forest-like conditions. So I've never used this particular way of putting it, but I wanted to be the agent of disarmament, the person who just ends up in the company of people who really were planning to find nothing. If you walk into a room of people who are oil and gas producers, and you are a historian, and you are going to speak about the progressive era and the attitudes of Theodore Roosevelt, there's just a moment of, what is she doing here? Why? Who? What? The conference organizer went wacko, and now we have this person, and that one they might be able to say, okay, conservation attitudes, regulation of natural resources, we might be able to get there. But sometimes it's much wilder than that. Sometimes it's just, here we are, and we are going to hear. Have just heard three speakers on. This is actually a conference I spoke at on nuclear waste management, and we have heard several engineers who know quite a bit about sequestering nuclear waste and what you need in casings and so on. And now we're going to have a Western American historian who's going to talk to us about the image of the West. And she is talking about how the West is a place where Americans have put populations they didn't know what to do with, removed Indian people, removed Mormons. And so, well, why are we hearing about the fact that Mormons were forced out of the eastern United States and landed in Utah, where we're nuclear waste management? Well, of course, you don't get anywhere in the nuclear waste business without finding an area that's often called something like a sacrifice zone where you can put nuclear waste in permanent storage, what you hope will be permanent storage. So within 4 or 5 minutes, people are thinking, oh, she's letting us know. This is quite a few years ago, but she's letting us know why the only candidates that ever make it to actual consideration for nuclear waste storage are in the West. So it's why the nuclear test site, Nevada test site, is where it is, southern Nevada. So she is giving us this long historical context to see, so we can see better the context that we're working in. Because now she finally got to that point. We wondered where she was going, but she got to the point about how in the 20th century, from the mid 20th century on, a strange group of people came into being and became very audible, and they loved deserts. They loved them, and they thought they were beautiful, and they were angry if something made a mess of that desert. Well, nobody saw that coming. In the 19th century, everyone, the overland travelers on the desert would just go, this is terrible, but the Lord made this. Why would they do that? It's a terrible mess. So I think that might have been the most bewildered audience ever looking at me when I was introduced at the International High-Level Radioactive Waste Management Conference in Las Vegas. And many, many people looking at their programs thinking that there must be 2 or 3 other conferences going in the same facility, and they'd gone to the wrong room. Then I would say somewhere at least 30 engineers or managers asking me for copies of my speech.
Afterward, well, you did the whole arousal and payoff thing. You started them just like, what is going on? Novelty. What in the world is she going to go anywhere with this? Oh, okay, I get it. And you are called upon a lot in American history for your ability to be able to sort of vet things out. For instance, I guess you were a consultant on the Dancing with Wolves movie.
It's an interesting problem of interpretation. I was not, and I'm still waiting for Kevin Costner to call me. I'm always eager to have a call from Kevin Costner, but he's a shy person, I guess. I don't know. For whatever reason, I've not heard from him. But the New York Times, there was a piece in the New York Times that saw my influence in Dances with Wolves. And I've heard much less probable things from the news media different times. So I see that I was part. That's what's so interesting about the whole experience with Western history, is that field seemed very much rigidified and going nowhere. In the early 1980s, when I was getting out of graduate school, that people in other fields of history were saying that is a dying field. There's very little interesting work going on in there. It's stuck in old formulas. The number of people attending the Western History Association plummeting.
Yeah.
So that's what it was like. And it could have kept going that way. And that's where I thank my parents for the birth date of 1951, because somebody was going to come of age at exactly the right time to say, we can't go on like this.
So you're talking about the fallacies of American movie making.
Yeah.
Larry McMurtry, you and he knew each other, the author of Dances or with Lonesome Dove and others who just recently passed away. But they had the romantic side of Western, and you're talking about really the reality of it.
It's so confusing. Yes, absolutely. What you just said there is the way I saw the world for a long time. I was debunking. I was bringing reality in. I was taking on the Hollywood nonsense. I was going to get, it's going to be quite wonderful. I was going to make the American people realistic and sensible.
And how'd that work for you?
Well, yeah. Well, that didn't happen. So then a new strategy. I mean, I really enjoyed the part. This is probably 30 more years ago when I was very much out in the world questioning all the assumed nonsense, and very fun. I enjoyed it very much. And then I think I did have to just look around and say, I don't seem to have advanced the ball here. I seem to be don't seem to be on a playing field, as a matter of fact. I'm just not really getting it. So I really changed strategies, and I never had Western wear. I never owned Western wear, but then I bought a lot of leather jackets with fringe, which you would think is not crucial to a historian's credibility, but it sure doesn't hurt in some circles if you have, in fact, I mean, really.
Oh, there you go. Nice cowboy hat. I like that. Well, you used to at Yale dress up like, white-faced and the fool and run around. Is it feeling like you have to do sort of the same thing here, that you have to have a wardrobe on if you're going to go out somewhat and talk about this?
I sure would not be able to accept the phrase have to, because it's so fun.
Mm-hmm.
Be dressed in funny clothes, and that can be funny boots, or it can be all kinds of things. So I would say it's a privilege to be able to put on clothes that make you at once comfortable but peculiar. That's really, really great. It's just such a relief to not be pretending. When I went for my first job interviews in the American Historical Association, my husband Jeff Limerick said, "You're going to have to get a women's suit. You're going to have to wear a women's suit." And I thought, well, it doesn't have anything to do with anything. Why would I do that? It's in my mind. And so he made me get that. And when I walked into that convention hotel filled with academic professional historians, I felt like I was in camouflage. I was so happy to have that.
You blended right in, huh?
I did. And yet that was funny too. That's another funny thing, that I dressed up as if I were a conventional academic, which in some ways I have been, but mostly no. So it's been just an incredibly great experience to try these different forms of communication. And I would say it got much better after I shifted out of the phrase I usually use is that I used to be contentious and controversial, and then I became congenial and collaborative. And the results were much, much better. And the stories were much more interesting after the shift.
And a part of your background, you talk about your purpose is to bridge the gap between academics and the general public, to make academics more accessible to the general public. Is this what you also use the fool's role in doing?
Your questions are uncomfortably good. We must cut back on this because I don't use the fool. I'm trying to think if I have ever. I've been the president of a number of professional academic associations, historian associations, and I've written and recited limericks. I've certainly done that. Last name, and nobody else does that. But I cannot remember. This is weird. I can't remember a time when I have gone to a meeting, a conference of historians, and put on clown makeup and gone out into the lobby to say hi. So I seem to have kind of segregated. Now, this is incredibly interesting because I believe that I am.
Can I say that's the outward facing persona of the fool? But you are probably still bringing that internal inquisitiveness, challengingness of a fool in these same situations.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. That I think I would make them. It would create noise in the system if I tried to give my presidential address at the Organization of American Historians in clown makeup. I did give it here, but not clown makeup. And there's, I guess that's the other thing. As a younger person, you're sort of you're weird and nervous, but you're kind of more at peace at making other people weird and nervous. And if you show up in clothing that is just not occasion appropriate and you're 26, that's pretty fun. But the fun of unsettling other people and yourself, that kind of diminishes. So I think you're absolutely right, though, that only the fool, only a person with my experience as a admitted, sometimes costumed fool, only that person could have written the book Legacy of Conquest, because I was just out of graduate school when I started that. You're not supposed to do that. When you get out of graduate school, you're supposed to write a cautious, narrow, carefully bounded and defined studies, and you're supposed to do several of those. And then if you go through the ranks and you get tenure, then you might be able to do something ambitious and broad scope. But you're not supposed to do. I did my first book, which is on my much more narrow revision of my dissertation. Then I instantly, way ahead of time. I was only 1 year out of graduate school when I thought, I'm going to write this other book, because I'd seen that Western history was declining. I mean, I think this is really quite comparable to some of the things you've seen in business, that once the folklore gets started, it's heading down, that company, that whole industry. Unless somebody can really say, I wouldn't go to the memorial service just yet. If you were planning to write your eulogy, I think we want to make sure that there's actually something born before we get to mourning. So that was what I got to do as a way out of the right career sequence. If I had not been out in clown makeup, if I had not written the president of Yale and asked to be appointed the official fool, if I hadn't walked around the campus in colorful self-presentation, I used to wear signs. They were very nice. They're just regular old cardboard signboards I made myself that would they would say, like, encouragement, any cause, or congratulations, any occasion. So I could walk up to a nervous student, very anxious, Yaley, and just say, hi, I'm the official fool. I wonder, would it be all right if I would love to congratulate you. Could you tell me something that, and they'd say, well, what about? And I go, well, that's no point. You'll have to tell me, because I've just met you. So I know there's something I should be congratulating you about, but I don't know what it is yet. So could you tell me what that is? And so, I finished the paper a day early. I said, that's great. That is so great. I can't believe you did that. That's wonderful. You finished the paper a day early. I don't think I've ever done that in my life. I'm a fool, but I don't believe I've ever finished a paper except write it. So I met so many people under so many happy circumstances. It was really, really fun. But it just made it impossible for me to really scare myself with the idea that if I wrote this overly ambitious book in the hope of saving a field that seemed to be going under, if I did that, I should feel anything except like I'm doing what I have to do. I'm doing what I think someone has to do. And to wait around for someone else to do it isn't equitable or fair. I have to do that. So I just don't think any of those things. I co-founder of the Center of the American West, recipient of a major grant from the Mellon Foundation to help young scholars make the transition into public engagement. Anyway, all kinds of things that had I not spent the time in clown makeup.
Well, and that's the character arc that is so fascinating to me, of going from being Yale's official fool, which, by the way, did people make fun of you? Did people look down at you? Did the other pompous Yale students what is this fool up to?
Oh, very good question. This is a very, speaking bureaucracies, the president of Yale never officially had a ceremony to appoint. And yet he corresponded with the fool and chatted with her from time to time. And he did accept my resignation. When I wrote a letter of resignation as Yale fool and said I would be going to Harvard, he wrote me a very nice letter complimenting me on my service as Yale fool and offering to write a letter of recommendation to the president of Harvard for me as fool, because he said clearly Harvard had more need of my services, he said. So,
and you became Harvard's official fool as well?
had an official proclamation there. It's very beautiful. It's really a wonderful. I got to go to the president's office, president, the dean of Harvard College, President Bach, Henry Musasky, the dean, both of them there, reading of a beautiful proclamation. I mean, if I had written a spectacular book, I don't think I would have had a ceremony in the president of Harvard's office with me totally. I mean, maybe 7 distinguished faculty would be there and we'd all be clapped for in sequence. But boy, did I get the royal treatment. I got the royal treatment, as the fool certainly should have on that with a king. So yeah, so it's there's something about it.
Yeah, you go from this appointed fool for two of the top institutions in America. You move on. You have a MacArthur Fellow. You have this amazing book, The Legacy of Conquest, that really took off. Why do you think that book took off the way it did?
Totally interested and someone with your skills and background and insights. I think timing was huge. I think that by the time I was out of graduate school, there were many, 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 many good studies of Western American history that did not fit in the old container. It just wasn't working.
And so in your book, you were challenging the folklore of the American West and saying that's not really the way it went down.
And I was challenging the academic power structure as well. So double on that. And I had all of these studies and academic journals and in university press books. I had all of these fragmented, specialized, siloed studies to draw on, and they had never been brought together. So my timing to start that when there weren't enough of those studies would have been precarious. Start that when there were too many would have been precarious. It's a little bit like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, that too hot a porridge, too cold a porridge. And so I came in just at the right moment of critical mass. There's enough stuff to draw on, to pull together, and to really say, this has got to change, and this is the direction it should go. This is the direction it has gone. So there was that. There's also the fact, this is pretty interesting, I have an unusually lively writing style in the academic
Some
world.
compare you to Kurt Vonnegut of American history in the way you write in academia.
Yes, and that didn't always go well. So what I mean, and the story, I had these sad stories, but they all turn out so well that they have to really pause and linger over the sadness. So I wrote my dissertation prospectus, and I was very nervous about that. A committee reviews those things in this particular department, and so your advisors have already said, "Oh, this is fine," but there's only 3 of them, and this whole committee is going to go over it. So really dark day, really dark day. I got a letter saying that the committee had reviewed my dissertation prospectus and they had rejected it because it was too humorously and too casually written. And when I showed an awareness of the serious scholarly issues raised by writing a dissertation, then I might have a passable product, but I did not.
So the fool was getting in your way at that moment.
Big time, big time. And then for a while to go, because this is so important. Any younger listeners in this, and I hope that this really gets through, that I had a very foolish notion, foolish so to speak, that if I ever, just to get somewhere that I needed to get there. If I compromised my distinctive true self, I would never get that back. So I had really a stupid idea, but I had this stupid idea that if I wrote the way this committee wanted me to write, that would be it for me. I would be as dreary as they wanted me to be. And I guess I don't know where I got this stuff, but my spirit would be broken. I would just be resigned as the fool. I don't know what I would do, but I would just be done in. So I resisted that hard. My poor advisor pled with me for months to just sit down, take the prospectus, take out the funny parts, take out the witty parts, make it sound academic, just do that, and it'll be a grease pig. But I had this whole peculiar and mysterious notion that would leave me with compromised integrity that I would never recover from. And it's dumb because people travel in different countries and they speak different languages in different countries. And nobody who is capable of going to France and chatting with the locals is anything but more because of that. So it took me a ridiculous amount of time before I finally thought, I'll just do it. But then as soon as I did it, I thought, well, sure, you would speak different languages for different occasions. Why would you not? Why would you think that there's some kind of vow of full loyalty to the eccentric self that means that you can't write a grant proposal that will require a certain formulaic language? But if you could write that grant proposal in the formulaic language and you could then get support and then you could do things that might benefit humanity, why in heaven's name wouldn't you just write the way they wanted you to write? So anyway, it took a long time to just say, I really had dug myself into a very deep hole on that. But it turns out that there were sort of stairs leading out of that hole. And I just got to walk out of there. And one absolutely ridiculous night, what I did basically was pretty funny. I wrote a parody of the old dissertation. I laughed and laughed, making it sound dreary and academic. And I like parodies. Parodies are, who wouldn't like parodies? But so that was really fun. So and it passed. It passed very easily after that.
So what advice do you have for our listeners who are always trying to become better, more persuasive communicators using story in it, from your experience, from very high-level academia to author to your MacArthur Fellowship to all the great work you've done and have been balancing this fool archetype with very serious academic and world historian, American historian anyways, archetype. With all that going on, what would you recommend or what advice would you give to our listeners to become more powerful storytellers from their point of view?
Right. I think that the enemy, there are two enemies that are pretty weak enemies, but you don't know that when they're threatening you. So one enemy is the notion that you will have to cover everything, the comprehensiveness demon or dragon, that you're just to really present what you need to present to a group of people who you want to persuade to support your business or whatever, that you really have to you have to really make sure that they know what you're doing, and they have to know it really thoroughly, really, really thoroughly. And at that point, you should cancel the meeting, because the comprehensiveness thing, I think maybe academics have a particularly bad version of it, but I don't think we have it exclusively, that you think, well, I really have to make sure that they understand this, they have to understand that. Oh, well, heavens, the background we have to give them before we could even get to the part. So that has to go. And the recognition that people will say years later, you spoke at our such and so, and you told this story about the time that your friend was walking home on an icy night with a philosophy graduate student who was insufferable and paid no attention to her difficulties of walking home from a party and a date, and spent the whole time talking about how precious his own head was. You told us that story. And whenever I have been in a situation where we're thinking too much about our own well-being and we're not thinking about somebody else's, I will tell them the story about the philosophy graduate student who could never say a kind word to his date about the fact that it was a very slippery sidewalk and she was at risk too, and we just kept talking about his own head. I tell them that story. I mean, I have no idea if anyone ever remembered that story, but it's that kind of thing. Pay attention to other people and don't put your own dilemma at the center of your attention. And you could say that in thousands of ways, but telling that story will block it. And so that acceptance that selectivity has got to be there, or you'll just lose the whole audience. So getting over just saying to the comprehensiveness demon to go away. We literally don't have time for you. And then the other thing, which is not too far apart from that, I guess, is that one way that the comprehensive demon collaborates to our injury is with the either or demon, which is that people think in paired units. And so you have to have a choice between this or that. Sometimes people get very into this notion that because we have two shoulders, two arms, two elbows, that we are just conditioned, two eyes, everything has to be in the either or thing. But hardly anything in life comes in an either or categorization. So that's, and I would say our person we both admire very much, that Randy has an and but therefore thing that absolutely refuses. Now we have two things and we'll choose between them. That's not the dynamic. It's where the but and the and interact and the therefore comes to their rescue. And I mean, that's the dynamic. So there are three things there. And if there were only two things, it would be the misery that we all have endured when a speaker thinks that there's my way or the highway, or there's this particular party at this particular moment and the opposing party. So,
and with the ABT, of course, we always talk about that singular narrative. What is the main point that you're trying to get across? And I presume that helps you overcome the comprehensive demon when I've got to fill it in, backfill it with all of this other information. So you get down to that singular narrative. And of course, the and button, therefore, is trying to play off that singular narrative. You want this, and it's important because of this, but you don't have it because of this. Therefore, let me roll out what may be one solution for you.
Exactly. And I'm so happy to say it hasn't been 24 hours since I was on a Zoom call with a young historian who's written a very important dissertation about Texas. I won't go into the details, but she had her first dose of the ABT method yesterday. And it was spectacular to see her just say at first, "Oh, that's what I'm really writing about." And what I mean, she's only been in graduate school for 6 years, so you think, yes, actually, you are now.
Well, you probably know that quote from being an author yourself is you write your book to figure out what book you're writing.
Yeah.
So you write through it and you've got the comprehensive demon in there until you get to the end of it. And then you rewrite it and go, oh, here's actually what my singular narrative is.
And sadly, in my world of the academic scholarship thing, that moment of, oh, that's what I was saying, may or may not come.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, last question for you. And this came directly from Randy. I called him before this saying, give me some more insights on Patty. Actually, two questions. Well, this first one's mine. I'm fascinated by how the universe delivered the fool the last name of Limerick.
Isn't that something? There is a kind providence. I went to Yale. There was an architecture graduate student named Jeff Limerick who was starting his program there in graduate school as well. The first day, I think it was, I met a bunch of people and they all had different last names. And one person's last name was Limerick. Now that's interesting because in college, before I had any reason to think I would ever have, I mean, I was madness if I thought I was going to have such a name. But when I got bored in a class, which will happen, even in a history class, I would write a limerick because you look really good. And I do recommend this to all your audience. If you were at a meeting and it's not really working for you, you can look like the most thoughtful note taker if you choose to do that. If you have a pad of paper and you look very intently at the speaker, really intently, because you might as well look at the speaker as not. So you look intently at the speaker and then, the first line. So there was a young man by the sea. Okay, I got that. So you write that down. I was at Santa Cruz, so there I had a lot of things about oceans. Anyway, so you write that down and then you might as well look back at the speaker. C. Fee. Okay, there was a young man by the sea who sold himself for a fee. Okay, that happens to be a limerick I wrote. We'll just go ahead. At $1 a time, it's no major crime. It's really a bargain, said he. So anyway, so I wrote that in college. And it's terrible. I shouldn't write things like that.
That's awesome.
Others are worse. Others are worse than that. So there I had gone through college writing limericks, and there I go to graduate school. And one of the first things that happens, the person whose last name is Limerick. So that he has passed away, but that was my first husband. And I was so stupid. I kept the name Patty Nelson for a year or two. And I thought,
yeah,
what in heaven's name? Why am I doing that? So got really, really lucky. So that's how I got that. And I do write really good limericks still, much more tasteful than the one that you.
Do you have one right there that you're very proud of?
I do have one that is particular to history, but certainly it got more relevant. I wrote it 20 years ago, but it sounds like I was writing it in the fake news. A swirl of diverse points of view, much as history into a stew. Facts now a fiction, earning much malediction, leaving liars with nothing to do. And actually, a little more industry-oriented one, because I did do a whole long project on fracking, hydraulic fracturing. So, and I tried to be neutral. I was neutral. So when you claim to be neutral on fracking, you're a quarterback set up for sacking. You can assert and declare that you're going to be fair, but you still won't escape frequent whacking. So
Patty Limerick needs to publish her limerick book.
I think I keep intending to do that. I keep writing more of them, so it's I need to do that. In fact, actually, there is another one on fracking that is even better. Oh, and it's okay. So there's always disputes about what level of government should be regulating hydraulic fracturing, and okay. So knowledge is tragically lacking on the complicated subject of fracking. Convinced they are right, people rush into fight, and no agency regulates yakking.
I like that one.
Okay.
There's some nice puns going on there. I like that.
I do. And it's actually true that no agency regulates.
Yeah.
What's really cool about this, Mark, is that people on every side of the fracking issue love those two limericks. So, speaking of the bridge building thing?
Yeah. Bridge building, humanizing it and saying, all right, it's serious stuff, but let's stop taking ourselves so serious. Let's sit down and see if we can find a solution to this.
Right.
Now back to my all-important question from Randy Olson. Tell me about date milkshakes.
All righty. Speaking of commerce and business. So my father had a very interesting career in Hollywood initially. He hardly initially. He grew up on a farm in Brigham City, Utah, raised Mormon. And then when he moved to Los Angeles in the 20s, he ended up working for an insurance company for a while, but then he got a job in Hollywood, and he was a screenwriter at Republic Films. And then the moral complexity of the Hollywood scene apparently wore him down. And so before I was born, he moved to Banning, California, and my Hollywood childhood did not happen. Woo-hoo. So my big sisters actually met a couple of movie stars, but I did not. But my father, then looking for another activity, built the California date shop in front of our house. And so Palm Springs was starting up as a real destination resort. Cars driving from Los Angeles to Palm Springs would go by. There wasn't a freeway, it's the main street. And so my father at the California date shop, he had chocolate covered dates and walnut stuffed dates and coconut covered dates, every kind of date. And he also made date shakes. And over the years, I guess I haven't had that chance, but like one of my professors in college, when he heard about my background, he said, I remember the date shake in Banning, California with such clarity because people didn't have air conditioning, and they'd be driving across the desert, and they'd be in Banning, and they'd get a date shake, and they didn't think they had died and gone to heaven. They just thought they had gone to heaven. They just knew that. So that was my day care center, not my daycare center, but my daycare center. My mother worked as a legal secretary, and I hung out from when I was an infant with my father, who was my caregiver, I guess. So we had this full-time job at the same time. And so that's where I had quite a bit of experience as a very young person, especially as I became a toddler, and people stopping in the date shop and saying to my father, where is the cowgirl? They had gotten me a little fringe skirt and little fringe. See, so it's full circle. I come back around and I get my own fringe vest and jacket. So I never really got the chance to be a tiny person afraid of others, because my daycare center was a place of...
You were thrust into it in the date shop. And I can tell you, my mother-in-law, Margie, loved date shakes. And my wife, Michelle, talks about stopping what must have been in Banning at your date shop.
It seems very likely. There was a competitor, but we won't go there.
All right.
On the other side of town. But my father went out of that business, but Mr. Hadley stayed in it, and you can still buy Hadley's dates. So that could have been my fortune. You see, I missed my Hollywood childhood, and I missed my... But it was very prescient, because here you are running around in your cowgirl outfit to now become the Janis Joplin of American history. Yes, it's all a very coherent life when you think about it.
At least it's coherent. Well, Patty, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Where can people learn more about you? Where should we send them?
Center of the American West, www.centerwest.org, or patricia.limerick@centerwest, one word, centerwest.org.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And by the way, do you have a limerick for the date shake?
I have no idea why the answer is no, but the answer is no, because date is so easy to rhyme, as is shake.
Well, I hope you'll write one, and this show will be going out in a couple of weeks. Maybe you can send it to me and we'll put it in the show notes.
There's a thought. I can't even begin to guess why I haven't done that. But
good. I'm glad we triggered something here in you.
Oh, you triggered a lot, actually. In fact, let's go for another hour. Would be okay if we just went for another hour or so.
This has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
It's really fun. Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to this edition of The Business of Story. If you like what you heard, by all means, share Patty and her story with your friends, family, colleagues. Definitely check out her book and check out her fantastic blog. Patty, where can they find your blog? Because it's a fun read.
It is. It's called Not My First Rodeo, and you can find it at www.centerwest.org.
There you have it. Check that out as well. And of course, if I can be of service to you, come on over to The Business of Story. Well, I've got tools, tips, techniques, and wonderful talent like Patty there to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. And don't forget about my new the ABTs of Selling online course. In under 18 minutes, you will learn what we have been teaching scientists: how to use the ABT to hack through the noise and hook the hearts of your prospects, your customers, your buyers sitting across from you. Check it out at businessofstory.thinkific.com. And until next week, when we will have another amazing story artist right here for you, like Patty, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is a story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.